I'm a passionate reader of fiction, I've always been, but when I read a new novel as a child, I couldn't help visualizing it like how it would look if it was turned into a movie. I couldn't help imagining its dialogue being spoken by all the actors or dubbing actors I liked most. It was like books existed to be turned into movies, and if they weren't turned into movies, or would not be, or could not be, they did not exist. Still, I had the ambition of reading the novel before watching the picture. Growing older, that included the experience of many, if not most, movie adaptations, failing to keep up with my imagination and the emotions of my very first reading. Having myself adapted 3 of my favorite novels, one of them, Winnetou Part 1, for stage performance, 2, Winnetou Part 3 and E.T.A. Hoffmann's Tomcat Moor for radio play, I have grown a lot more appreciation for their original medium, the novel as such, and I am finally realizing the definite version of one of my favorite novels, The Neverending Story by Michl Ende, may in fact not be one of its adaptations, even when it is featuring my favorite kid actors, Tammy Stronach, Jack Black, or the sadly deceased Jonathan Brandis. The definite version of the book, The Neverending Story, may in fact be the book. But which book? I urge you all to watch the video of Uralte Morla, because she presents to you 19 different editions of the novel. And even if you don't understand any German at all, the video is in German, you get a very good idea of what the different editions look like and how differently they choose to handle the characters and narratives. I choose to concentrate on only one edition, the definite one for me. The genesis of Michl Ende's novel, The Neverending Story, was long and painful because the author kept rewriting and changing the whole concept over and over while he was making it. This is not what this essay is about. When his script was finally ready, he had a very precise conception of how this book was supposed to be. It was supposed to look and to feel like an ancient tome of magic, like the Necronomicon, bound in leather, nacre and messing buttons. It would have been a publisher's nightmare to produce, and a non-seller, just like Charles de Coster's first Uhlenspiegel edition, because no one would have been able or willing to afford it. What made it both affordable and artistically satisfying can be led back to the effort of one person, Vice Admiral Roswitha Quadflieg. She created the definite version of The Neverending Story. Roswitha Quadflieg was the daughter of Will Quadflieg, one of the most famous German theatre actors during and after the Second World War. He was in movies and TV, needing neither. His efforts therein were both neglectable when compared to his outstanding career both as a voice and as a stage actor. I watched him a few years before his death, playing the part of Tubal in The Merchant of Venice. I had no idea he was going to be part of the performance until he started to own the stage in the shortest and most insignificant part of the whole play, having a blast doing it. He really must have loved his profession to the death. His son was probably the best-looking German actor of his time. I saw him as Hamlet. His first daughter, Roswitha Quadflieg, chose a different path. The person, sadly looking like Vice Admiral Holdo here, wrote several novels, radio and stage plays. In 1978, she was still in her late 20s. On her own website, she tells it this way. In 1978, Michl Ende took me to his main publishing house, Thienemann Verlag in Stuttgart, based on 2 picture books that we had made together before. Now I got the order to illustrate and to take care of the overall design of his Neverending Story, which was just being written at the time. what a challenge for the book artist, who was then in her late 20s. Since this story takes place on 2 levels, I came up with the idea to have the text printed in 2 colors, the reality in red, fantasy in green. Michael Ende was immediately enthusiastic, and together we managed to inform and convince the publisher to use this unusual and costly typography. These 2 colors became the basic tone of the whole book. At my suggestion, Ende organized the text into 26 chapters, and I preceded each one with an initial of our alphabet, crayon and pen drawings in red-green. Also, the ornaments above the columns, the sample of the end papers, binding and dust jacket received this color combination. Michael Ende described his magic book that Bastian Balthasar Books stole from the antique store, just as I designed it. In 1979, after he finally returned from his fantasy, the Neverending Story was published and was a huge success. At the beginning of the new millennium, I was rationalized away by the publisher. The Neverending Story appeared in various new garments. It was thought that a breath of fresh air was needed, disregarding the author's opinion and design described in the novel, which was probably unique in the world literature, the result of a Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art developed jointly by him and the illustrator. A special edition was published for the 30th anniversary in 2009, again with my equipment. Since then, it has only been available as an antique. End of quote. You can still buy this version second-hand, but no longer being reprinted. It will be slowly fading away in the near future. What I am trying to do here now is to retain it both for you and for posterity. To label it as educational, I will add some information about lesser-known source material and storytelling traditions, which might have been or might not have been important for the author Michael Ende when he created his most famous novel. Michael Ende drew from various sources. Some were ancient legends and sagas, such as that of Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. Some were medieval, like the Arthurian legends, and courtly love as represented by German authors such as Hartmann von Aue and Wolfram von Eschenbach, narrator of the Parzival novel. Some came from the Renaissance, like François Rabelais or Shakespeare, who is even quoted directly and mentioned by name. Some came from Baroque, like the fairy tale dramas of Carlo Gozzi, all of which were also used and conveyed by the authors of German Romanticism, such as Ludwig Tieck, the famous Shakespeare translator. And most importantly for Michael Ende, E.T.A. Hoffmann. Both Michael Ende and E.T.A. Hoffmann were shunned by German critics, particularly after the Second World War. The critics thought both were promoting a fantastic literature without practical and/or political applicability in the real world. Both Hoffmann and Ende are probably equally misunderstood. They did promote and thought highly about the unintentional play of fantasy and the arts. Unintentionality is a recurring motive, particularly in Jim Button and in the Neverending Story. Most of the real important goals in both novels can only be reached unintentionally, but both authors also insisted succeeding in life means to bring both realms together, fantasy and everyday reality. Only who can enter the realms of Phantasien or Dschinnistan and come back to the real world can heal both worlds, because the problems of our real world in fact can't possibly be solved without the free and unintentional play of your imagination. And then there were authors of the fin du siècle like Karl May and Aleister Crowley, both being cited literally in the novel. Some of these narrative traditions, as continued by Michael Ende, are reflected in the design of the novel. The change between Latin letters and German Fraktur reflect the times of early book printing. The marvelously beautiful initials at the beginning of every chapter reflect the art of medieval pre-printing book illumination. Even the ornaments heading every single page look like they are modeled after medieval manuscripts. The fleuron ornaments, or also fleuronnet, connect the pages with the initials, and they connect all single initials with each other like a recurring leitmotif, or like the red flowers found on the illuminations of the medieval Manesse manuscript. By the way, this here is Hartmann von Aue, and this is Wolfram von Eschenbach. Both their Arthurian novels resemble the Neverending Story in its structure. They all have 2 parts, and all reach, at the end of the first part, a seemingly happy ending, when indeed their most significant trials still lie ahead in the second part. And only Michl Ende and Wolfram von Eschenbach exchange their respective protagonists mid-novel. The protagonist Bastian Balthasar Bux is, by his second name, Balthasar, connected with the protagonist of Michl Ende's first novel, Jim Button. According to Catholic Southern German legend, the 3 holy kings in the Bible, the wise men from the Orient, were called Caspar, Melchior, and Balthasar. Jim Button is the heir of the wise holy king Caspar. Bastian wears the name of the wise holy king Balthasar, but there is little regal or heroic about the obese, cowardly and sad half-orphan when he discovers the Neverending Story in the shop of the antiquarian Karl Conrad Coriander. I quote, "The cover was made of copper-colored silk and shimmered when he turned it back and forth. On a cursory leaf through the pages, he saw that the writing was printed in 2 different colors. There seemed to be no pictures, but beautiful large initial letters. When he took a closer look at the cover, he discovered 2 snakes, one light and one dark, biting each other's tails to form an oval. And in this oval stood in peculiarly intertwined letters the title, The Neverending Story." Roswitha Quadflieg has not designed the book to match Michl Ende's original description. It was the other way round. Roswitha Quadflieg designed the book, and then Michl Ende described it. The cover could have been done better, in my opinion. You can hardly make out the engraved title or the 2 snakes biting each other's tail. You have to watch the dust jacket to recognize it. Obviously, the oval, which is also Aurin, the amulet and sign of the childlike empress, is a variant of Ouroboros, the snake biting its own tail, representing eternity, or, at least for Friedrich Nietzsche, the eternal recurrence. Still, I like Quadflieg's design better than its design in the movie. There's a lot going on in the empty space between the 2 snakes. You need that empty space. And if you weave the snakes into each other like the movie does, they fill that space completely, not only killing the connection to Ouroboros, but also leaving no room for the most decisive scene of the novel to take place in. The first initial A takes us immediately into the world of Fantastica, or Phantasien as it is called in German. 3 of the protagonists you already know from the movie, the Rockbiter, the Dwarf and the Nighthawk, banding together to tell the childlike empress about the danger looming over their home world Phantasien, which is being slowly and piece by piece devoured by the Nothing. Only the 4th character, the Will-o'-the-Wisp, never made it into the movie. The early sketches of movie Rockbiter even resembles Quadflieg's original design. Finally arriving at the residence of the childlike empress, the Ivory Tower, they learn that the childlike empress is in fact sick. The many doctors disputing about the sickness of the childlike empress remind the reading Bastian at the death of his own mother and at the stage of grief it has put him and his father in. While the movie portrays Bastian's father as an emotionally distant but practical, raw, egg-swallowing businessman, the book describes him, a dentist, as completely emotionally unavailable, stuck in his loop of grief but unable to communicate it to his son. Even when he's there, he actually isn't. Having a son of my own today, this part of the novel hits a little harder. The initial B presents to us our first hero and a supporting character, the centaur and medic Chiron. Chiron is a centaur, like in the legend of old Greece. Following Michl Ende's description to the letter, Quadflieg shows us here how freely Michl Ende uses the narrative traditions of ancient legends. The black skin color of the upper body and the abdomen striped like a zebra suggest not a Greek, but an African origin. Like in his first novel, Jim Button, Michl Ende decided to include an African character or African-inspired character. The straw hat seems a little cliched to me, lacking the, and I quote, peculiar design Michl Ende had described it to have. On behalf of the childlike empress, Chiron instructs the hero Atreyu, a boy of Bastian's age, to seek the remedy for the disease that has befallen both Phantasien and the childlike empress at the same time. And he gives him the sign of the childlike empress, the amulet Aurin, which is reproduced on the book's cover. Atreyu's hair is described as black and blue, or as black with a shimmer or sheen of blue, which almost literally matches the description of the character Winnetou by Karl May. Like many or almost all German boys in his generation, Michl Ende had read Karl May in his youth. According to a friend, he started reading Winnetou shortly after Winnie the Pooh, so it was at a very young age, before hitting puberty. I quote, "When Michl Ende didn't want to let go of the last Winnetou volume one evening, 'Just this chapter, Mum,' and read on and on instead of going to bed. And when Mum finally found out that he was secretly opening new chapters, Lise was seized by holy anger, and she put the book in the cannon furnace where it burnt, miserable screaming from the prevented reader who now missed the death of the Apache chief. One day when he was already famous, an admirer who had heard about this story brought the book to his house as a gift. Ende put it aside unread. For him, Winnetou is still alive today. This story relates to the Neverending Story in more than one way. Firstly, it may have been the first time Michl Ende found himself forced to creatively fill out the blanks of the story himself, up to the point where reading the novel was no longer important. In the Neverending Story, Michl Ende would invite his readers to do the same. The often repeated sentence, "This is another story for another time," does not mean he, Michl Ende, is going to tell you. Instead, he reaches out to you to do it, just like Michl Ende had done with the story of Winnetou. Secondly, Ende trusting his fictional friend Winnetou to bring the story to a happy conclusion, even without himself being there to read it, is mirrored by the promise Atreyu will give to Bastian at the end of the novel. So his protagonist's resemblance to Winnetou and his models, Chingachgook and Ankus, isn't surprising. But is Atreyu really an indigenous character like the letters? In his first novel, Jim Button, Michl Ende had chosen a fictional empire of China as a scene of action. From the political left, he was criticized for trivializing imperial China. From the right, he was criticized for trivializing the communist China of Mao. Ende decided to take China out of the novel and called it Mandala instead. By turning Atreyu green instead of red, he ensures that he is seen as, like mandala, a product of fantasy and imagination. The initial C shows us Morla, the giant turtle who gives Atreo the advice to seek Uralte, the southern oracle. You know her from the movie. The bark trolls never made it into the movie. Judging from the images, this isn't very surprising. The character of Morla is matched perfectly. All the fatalism and weariness of the character are on display. On the other hand, the bark trolls gain their individuality solely by the parts they are missing due to their encounter with the all-devouring nothing. Their faces look exactly the same. When compared to masters like Gustave Doré, the individuality of her character's facial expressions are not Quadflieg's strong suit. But this is perfectly fitting with the medieval sources Quadflieg has chosen to emulate, given that all the poets of the Manesse manuscript look exactly the same too. Quadflieg has chosen those means of expressions that she was able to master. Igramul, the shape-shifting spider who has entrapped the lucky dragon Fuchur, never made it into the movie either, but here she is on glorious display with the initial D. It is a pity that neither her shape-shifting ability nor her composition out of millions of black insects is visible for the reader. Her poison kills within an hour, but it also enables both Fuchur and Atreu to wish themselves far, far away, right in front of the southern oracle. I always preferred Quadflieg's versions of Fuchur to the movie, because it looks more like a real Chinese dragon. Michl Ende had used a vaguely similar character before in the second Jim Button novel. There she is a golden dragon of wisdom, while Fuchur is a bronze dragon of luck. I prefer to go with the German name Fuchur because the character Forkor from the movie never really clicked with me. I hated that puppy-faced muppet from the get-go. Sorry. The initial E makes us wonder if we are watching the gnome Engiwook, the southern oracle scientist, or his wife Orgel, who heals Fuchur and Atreu from the nasty effects of Igramul's poison. Compared with both Igramul and their movie counterparts, the Sphinxes do not look particularly scary. Michl Ende also complained the movie Sphinxes looked like strippers. He has a point there, by the way, and the Mad Magazine parody acknowledged as much. The Quadflieg Sphinxes look exactly like in the images of John Flaxman, which usually accompanied Gustav Schwab's classical collection of sagas from ancient Greece. They do a great job representing the narrative tradition that those sphinxes come from, and the way in which German kids of Michl Ende's generation would first get to know them. The movie makes it look like to get past the two sphinxes, you have to feel your strength strongly somehow, yet in the end it is enough to be just quicker. Both is wrong in the world of the novel. No person of Phantasien has any influence on who is led through. It is literally out of their world. The reader decides who is led through and who isn't. This is why Engiwook is unable to predict it. It is literally out of his world of expertise. All the gates and the oracle itself are in their own way connected to the world outside, the world of men. We can see the second gate, the mirror gate, at the beginning of chapter F. It is empty because Roswitha Quadflieg does not wish to spoil what Atreu is going to see in the mirror. The mirror gate shows him the reader from the world outside, Bastian, and going into his mirror image, Atreu unintentionally assumes parts of his identity, which makes him temporarily forget about his quest and enables him to enter the third gate, a gate that can only be entered unintentionally. Both the movie and Roswitha Quadflieg shows do not represent this third gate. In the movie, the actual oracle is a sort of repetition of the first gate. In the novel, it is just a voice, in a peristyle. It looks a little like in Kingdom Hearts. Here, from the bodiless voice, Atreu finally learns the remedy both for Phantasien and the childlike Empress, and that her new, true name, the only thing that can save her, must be provided by a human from the world outside. Letter H shows us the 4 wind giants, who never made it into the movie either. They mock Atreyu and Fuchu for searching a border to Phantasien, because, as they must know best, Phantasien is limitless. It has no border. Funny how even with different noses, the 4 giants look exactly the same. But watch how majestic and regal Fuchu looks here. I know people love movie Folko. The voice was okay, but I would choose Quadflieg's dragons over Peterson's without having to think about it. About letter I, Atreyu has realized his quest was in vain, and he has temporarily lost Fuchu too. Atreyu's dark surroundings mirror the point beyond hope, which he has now entered. Here, I think the visuals of the movie are a little more inspired than Quadflieg's. Her empty houses of Spooky Town seem half out of Psycho and half out of Arnold Böcklin's Isle of the Dead. Just that, actually, even the cobwebs aren't enough to make them sinister or scary. Gmork, the evil werewolf, no longer seems scary either. That's because Quadflieg portrays him exactly as Michl Ende describes him. Starved to death and no fight left in him. But that's what makes the original novel's dialogue so much more satisfying than the movie version. In the movie, Gmork and Atreyu fight a battle of bodies. In the novel, they fight a battle of minds. Gmork knows what the nothing is, but making Atreyu listen to him, he ensures Atreyu is encircled and trapped by the nothing. Michl Ende has put a lot into that dialogue. If you would read only 1 chapter out of the novel, by all means you should read this one, because the movie hardly even scratches the surface. We do not even learn Gmork is able to walk in both worlds, the human world and Phantasien, dealing with lies, increasing evil on both sides, serving power to get power, like the necromancers of an E.T.A. Hoffmann novella. I wish Quadflieg would have portrayed his multifaceted evil a little more convincingly. On the other hand, his face is about the only thing the movie actually gets right. The letter J shows us Roswitha Quadflieg's most detailed version of the childlike empress's residence, the Ivory Tower. In Michl Ende's description, it is as big as an entire city. I quote, "From a distance, it looked like one pointed, high mountain cone that was twisted into itself like a snail shell, and the highest point of which was in the clouds. Only when getting closer you could see that this gigantic sugar loaf was made up of countless towers, turrets, domes, roofs, bay windows, terraces, archways, stairs and balustrades that were nested inside and on top of each other. Everything was made of the whitest, fantastic ivory, and each detail was so preciously carved you might mistake it for the finest lace." In his first novel, Jim Button, Michl Ende describes the precious work of ivory carvers. The descriptions are very similar, using the same comparison with the finest lace. Yet the Ivory Tower is both monumental and filigree, both gigantic and delicate at the same time. The seeming contradiction stirs the imagination. The only imagination the movie demands of the viewer is concerned mostly with the question of where to find the stairs. Michl Ende hated this radio tower, as he called it, and he does have a point here too, because the rainbow and the light beams are arranged almost identically to the radio tower of RKO Pictures, which Michl Ende would at once recognize, since he had worked as a movie critic in the 50s. Quadflieg is a lot more in line with Ende's description, but let's be honest, Quadflieg's design sucks. It looks like Bruegel's Tower of Babel, or like a beggarman's Minas Tirith. I like the version on the dust jacket a little better, but it only works because it is a picture from very, very far away. The spire was supposed to look like a magnolia bud. This is not a magnolia bud. This is at best a pine nut. Zirbelnuss, Herr Müller, Zirbelnuss. The childlike empress looks exactly like the one girl face Quadflieg is able to draw. It is beautiful, but it doesn't hold a candle to Tami Stronach. By the way, Michl Ende did not reject the actress Tami Stronach. He rejected her surroundings. The throne room seemed to him like a nightclub, the sickbed like a brothel. I get what Ende means though. Her surroundings in general, and the white seashell in particular, suggest eroticism, not a sickbed. But she is a childlike empress, not the Botticelli Venus, and in that sense I find Roswitha Quadflieg's version a little more fitting. Atreo ends his quest, thinking it has all been in vain. The childlike empress knows it was a success, because he has brought their savior, Bastian, the reader, with him. She knows Bastian has already chosen her true name for her. All that remains to do now for him is to say it. But Bastian does not say it, and it is not because his father told him to keep his feet on the ground. In the novel, his father told him no such thing. It is because Bastian feels ashamed of himself, too ugly, fat, weak, and unworthy of the task or of Atreo's friendship. Bastian's quest is just beginning. Atreo ends his by taking off Aurin, and now, as we will learn later, he experiences what is inside it, inside the empty space between the two snakes. It is the waters of life, from which you must drink, because only by drinking from them you can learn to love. It is unfilmed territory from here on. I wonder where and how they would have even placed that well inside the intertwined snakes of the movie Aurin. Would they have been the roof and the waters of life somewhere below? Perhaps filming the second and most important part of the novel never was on the table. In order to call forth her savior Bastian, the childlike empress orders her invisible powers to carry her forth aimlessly. Just like Jim Button can only find the pirates who hold the secret of his heritage by letting his ship be carried wherever wind and waves want them to go, the childlike empress can find her determination only unintentionally. The old man from the wandering mountain, who keeps and writes the book, The Neverending Story, while it happens, and while Bastian reads it. This character Roswitha Quadflieg has modeled after Michl Ende himself, for obvious reasons. Against his will, the childlike empress orders him to tell her the never-ending story from the beginning, knowing that it will force everything to happen over and over again in a circle of eternal recurrence, in the literal sense, not the Nietzschean. But the beginning is not the beginning Bastian has already read. It is the beginning he has himself experienced when he stole the never-ending story from the antiquarian Carl Conrad Coriander. He is now part of the never-ending story himself, and of the circle of eternal recurrence, which only he has the power to end. This is what finally brings him to speak out the childlike empress's name, Moon Child. As Bastian now enters the book himself, the letters of the book turn green permanently. The red letters, representing the world outside, the human world, are no longer there. Phantasien is no longer there either. Neither Atreo nor the Rockbiter or the Nighthawk are waiting for Bastian. Bastian and the childlike empress are alone in the dark. Phantasien is gone and must be created anew by Bastian's own wishes. His first wish, to see her face again, calls forth Pereline, the glowing night forest. Now, the fleurons, or fleuronnets, are no longer ornamental. Now they are the actual content of the image. Bastian's wish to be worthy of her turns him into a strong and beautiful hero in oriental garment, much like Karl May's Karabennemsi. While he is still rejoicing about the unexpected change, the childlike empress is suddenly gone. But he has left him her amulet Aurin, and Bastian is now able to read its scripture. Do what thou wilt. His next wish, to be tough and hardened, calls forth "Go up, the desert of colors." By wishing for toughness, he has wished it into existence. By naming it, he has given it a past and a history reaching through the ages. His next wish is for courage, and it calls forth the dangerous lion Graograman. But with the courage Bastian wished for, Graograman is easily defeated. But Bastian's wishes do not only change his surroundings and himself, their fulfillment also lets him forget how he was before his wish. Having become beautiful, strong, tough, and courageous, he has now forgotten he was fat, weak, and fearful before. Bastian has created a new, superheroic identity for himself, much like Karl May did with Karabenemsi and Old Shatterhand. And as Bastian is, like the escapist author Karl May, losing his touch with reality, the world that he comes from, his memory of it is slowly erased, wish by wish. In the following chapter Graograman becomes Bastian's tutor, and he warns him. Our inscripture is not an invitation to blindly follow each and every desire or whim. It instructs Bastian to find his true will. Here Michl Ende is diving deep into the realm of Thelema, as taught, among others, by Aleister Crowley. Michl Ende is not a Satanist, but he had strong ties to the occult. The Renaissance poet François Rabelais had, for his novel Gargantua and Pantagruel, invented the Abbey of Thelema as a satirical contrast to contemporary cloister life or convent life. Crowley took the motto of Rabelais' fictional Abbey of Thelema, "Do what thou wilt," seriously, and gave it a new, deeper meaning. Michl Ende follows and further develops Crowley's central belief that discovering and following one's true will is the path to self-realization and personal fulfillment. Yet in order to discover his true will, Bastian will have to follow the path of his wishes. Graograman just warns him that it is the most dangerous path imaginable, and that whoever follows it does so at the danger to get lost forever. He gives Bastian a precious gift, the magic sword Sikandar, a sword with a blade created out of pure light. Quadflieg's drawing fails to display it as such, but yes, Sikandar is the first light sword, never mind its unconspicuous sheath, and it was very likely invented before that of George Lucas. Since Bastian no longer remembers the shame he felt in prospect of meeting Atreyu in all his weakness and cowardice, the new wish for his friendship opens the door to the Temple of Wishes, where Bastian follows the image of Atreyu until he emerges in an altogether different region of Phantasien, close to the magnificent silver town of Amargant. Quadflieg's depiction of Amargant, a town built on swimming ships, is perhaps the most beautiful of Quadflieg's images. Bastian and Atreyu stand on the bottom, preparing the reader for the moment they have been waiting for. Bastian and Atreyu are still separated by fleuron ornaments, but obviously coming close to finally meet each other. Above them we see the waters of Morhu, the Lake of Tears. It is not harmless water. It is highly corrosive and deadly, but the corrosive waters help distilling the silver out of which this floating silver town is made. The Lake of Tears may not or may be stolen from Bartók's Bluebeard. And there it is, Amargant, the city of silver and fireworks above. Even the disappointing second movie seems to understand that this city is inspired by Venice. The ruler of the town is called Querquobat, and this name is almost a direct citation. It is a variant of Kaikobat, a minor character from the play Turandot, written by the Venetian playwright Carlo Gozzi. Perhaps you know the opera adaptation by Giacomo Puccini. Paul Potts got famous for singing its most well-known aria in 2008. Carlo Gozzi inspired a whole number of operas, opera designs and novellas, two of those written by Michl Ende's most important example, E.T.A. Hoffmann, but also The Magic Flute by Mozart, the first opera of Richard Wagner and others by Prokofiev, Henze, and last but not least, Richard Strauss, who used the name of Kai Kobat for his opera Woman Without Shadow. Bastian himself is going to invent the fairy tale about Amargant's creation, which is at once turned into reality, and it is also heavily inspired by Carlo Gozzi's plays. This chapter is loaded with citations and allusions to older fantasy literature. When Bastian leaves the Temple of Wishes, he meets a group of knights heavily inspired by Arthurian legends as written by Hartmann von Aue and Wolfram von Eschenbach. They even invite him to join their round table to table with them. In German, tabling is another word for dining. They are on their way to a tournament held by King Quobat and Atreyu, who are trying to find the strongest hero of Phantasien to seek and protect their savior, which is of course Bastian himself. Three of the knights, Hykryon the strong, Hybald the dashing, and Hydorn the tough, strongly resemble the Three Musketeers by the black author Alexandre Dumas, or the Warriors Three by Jack Kirby, or the Trefoil Leaf by, again, Karl May. They are all beaten, however, and very gallantly and courtly, by hero Hynrek, who considers himself the greatest hero of Phantasien and belittles the savior because he desperately tries to impress the Princess Oglamar, whom he is in love with. She, however, following the rules of courtly love as pronounced by both French and German medieval court poets, I already mentioned Hartmann and Wolfram, rejects his love. Bastian defeats the self-proclaimed hero, and when the humiliated Hynrek breaks all courtly manners and protocol by attacking him, Bastian's magic light sword Sikander cuts his armor and sword into pieces. Finally, Atreyu makes known the savior is already among them. He has recognized Bastian, not because of his strength, but by his gaze. In the chapter Q, Atreyu, Furo, and Bastian become friends. But while Atreyu's unconditional friendship and love recognizes how much Bastian has already changed and urges him to seek a way home before he loses himself completely, Bastian, much like the humiliated hero Hynrek, desperately seeks Atreyu's admiration and respect, if not as a hero and storyteller, then as a helper and benefactor. To make peace with hero Hynrek, Bastian wishes for a dragon for Hynrek to prove himself and rescue his beloved princess, as we can see here. And the always crying Acharai, who have created the silver town Amargant with their tears, he turns into the always laughing Schlamuffen, unintentionally destroying the Amargantian ecosystem. The letter R is another masterpiece of Roswitha Quadflieg, contrasting the miserable Acharai with the seemingly happy Schlamuffen. I love the level of detail in the silver turret which the Acharai have created and which the Schlamuffen will soon destroy. The letter S presents a number of new companions who are much like the already mentioned Warriors Three, let's just call them so from now on, joining Bastian's company in hope of gaining a story of their own in his presence. Atreyu, however, has not failed to realize Bastian's latest wish has made him forget being ridiculed by his classmates at school and urges him again to seek a way home. Still desperate for Atreyu's approval, Bastian agrees to not use Aurin's wishing power for a while, but the travelers soon find that unless Bastian wishes for something, they cannot progress. His intelligent mule Yicha, Bastian rides on a mule, like Jesus rode on a donkey. Yicha tells him why. Phantasian's geography is destined by his wishes, and without wishing for something, he can't get anywhere. But Jicha knows where he is headed. Bastian is really riding towards the ivory tower, because he is longing to see Moonchild again. And when he tells Atreo and Fuchur, they have an exhausting dispute, resulting in a new wish. Bastian now wants to be dangerous. He wants to be respected and feared. His wish calls forth a new adversary, the evil sorceress Xaide. We see her here to the right of the letter T. Below her, her castle and her silent henchmen, the armored giants. Unfortunately, we cannot see her face very well. Michl Ende has described her to have 2 eyes of different color, one red, one green. He probably thought of Quadflieg's color concept here, but Quadflieg does not make use of it. The warriors 3 are soon arrested by the giants, and Atreo and Bastian have to work together to free them. For once, they are acting in harmony, like Winnetou and Old Shatterhand used to, up to the point where Atreo assumes Bastian's identity to distract Xaide from Bastian's simultaneous rescue attempt. This is also where Michl Ende cites Karl May literally. To look more like Bastian, Atreo ties his hair into a knot to make it look like Bastian's turban, which is literally how Karl May used to describe Atreo's role model Winnetou. His long hair, black with a sheen of blue, tied into a knot, making it look like a turban. Bastian reaches the imprisoned warriors 3, but he cannot free them from their chains yet, because his magic light sword Sikander cannot be drawn. It has to spring into his hand on its own accord. But when the giants attack him, Sikander makes short work of them, and Bastian can free his friends afterwards. Xaide humbles herself before Bastian, accepting his victory and offering her service. As it turns out, she has already sent her sedan chair ahead to Bastian's camp. Atreo's warning her defeat might not what it seems angers Bastian, finally falling out with him. The letter U is probably my second favorite Quadflieg image, because the image of Gigam, the star cloister, is so beautiful and atmospheric. The character of Xaide seems modeled after Armida from Torquato Tasso's Gerusalemme Libertata, who was modeled after Alcina from Ariost's Orlando Furioso, who was again modeled after Circe or Circe from the Odyssey of Homer. There is a long tradition of evil sorceresses going into this character. All these witches try to seduce their male enemy with either love or power, or love of power. The starlit dome here reminds at Karl Friedrich Schinkel's famous set design for the Queen of the Night from Mozart's Magic Flute, another one of Xaide's role models. As beautiful as the design is, the chapter feels like filler. Xaide seduces Bastian to wish for wisdom, for standing above feelings of friendship or love. The monks of the Star Cloister seek Bastian's guidance, because they wish to know all about their origins. Bastian tells them they are characters in a book lying in a school attic where he left it, and by consuming the light of the precious jewel Al-Zahir, Bastian enables them for a mere second to look outside of the pages of the book and into the attic. At the same time, he forgets everything about the book and the attic, having no longer any clue how he got into Phantasian in the first place. The chapter feels like filler because what Bastian loses seems more important than what he experiences. His quest for wisdom, leaving him actually dumber in the end, isn't really surprising because it never seemed very seductive from the get-go. Finally arriving at the ivory tower, Bastian is devastated to find it empty and the childlike empress gone, probably for centuries. Longing for the succor of his former friends, Bastian seeks Atreo and Fuchur in secrecy, concealed by Gemal, the belt of invisibility, a present of Xaide. He arrives in the very moment when Atreo makes a fateful decision. To save Bastian, he wants to steal the wish-granting Aurin from him. Bastian has him arrested at once, then banishes them far, far away for the rest of their life. Seduced by Zaide, Bastian finally decides to crown himself as the new childlike emperor of Phantasien. Fortunately, the ceremonies take a long time to prepare, and Atreo uses this time to assemble 3 armies to defeat Bastian and take Aurin from him by force in order to save him. At the day of the coronation, Atreo's armies start their attack. Michl Ende refuses to explain how Atreo's armies were able to drive back and defeat Bastian's and Zaide's superior forces. He just enigmatically states the true reason may be this: Atreo did not fight for himself, but for his friend, whom he wanted to defeat in order to save him. I found that unconvincing at first reading. Today, thinking about the German history, I find myself saying yes, maybe that's it. When Atreo and Bastian meet again, the ivory tower is already in flames. Bastian is seeking revenge, but his magic light sword Sikander won't spring into his hand, and he is at Atreo's mercy when Bastian finally decides to draw Sikander against its will, and due to his super strength he manages to do it and wounds Atreo, who would be falling to his death, was it not for Fuchur saving him and carrying him away. Bastian pursues Atreo until his mechanical horse, one of Zaide's, collapses under him, and Bastian finds himself at the old emperor's town. It is a madhouse full of humans having lost their senses. Their warden is the monkey Argax, who tells Bastian that each of the town's inhabitants once were human, just like him, and they all wanted to be emperor like him. He tells Bastian that he can only wish as long as he still has memories. He can only have about 4 memories and 4 wishes left. He must find a wish that brings him back home. But that's not possible when he has already spent all of his memories. His only chance of finding one, Argax tells him, is now yours Minrud, or yours mine, and he will have to get over the Sea of Fog to get there. Roswitha Quadflieg depicts the old emperor's town just as crazy as Michl Ende describes it. Even the shade of MC Escher, namely the stairs being upside down or leading nowhere, are part of the description. Argax reigns above the town, and above him we can see the Sea of Fog, with the seafaring people Iskalnari on their boats. They are only little green dots here, lacking individuality, and this is actually fitting, because the Iskalnari have no individuality. They are strictly collectivist. Bastian himself no longer wishes to be the best, the wisest, or the strongest of all. He no longer wishes to be special. He wishes to be part of a collective. This conveniently aligns with crossing the sea, because he can cross the sea only by becoming part of the Iskalnari's collective himself. Quadflieg's depiction, however, is adequate at best. The second part of this chapter is considerably weaker than the first. Michl Ende was never a communist. In the novel Momo, a King Maxentius Communis is actually the villain of a story within the story, and most progressive contemporary critics hated him for being not leftist enough. Therefore, it seems to me he wasn't really able to describe being part of the Iskalnari's collective as anything particularly interesting or desirable. Bastian emerges wishing to be loved unconditionally, and his wish leads him to the changing house of Lady Iola, who takes him in as her child, growing flowers and fruit out of her body for Bastian to eat. She shows her love, feeding him, singing for him, teaching him to forgive himself, and to finally find his last wish, his true will. Bastian's true will is to love, and to do that he has to seek the waters of life. Quadflieg's image of the letter X and the changing house is one of the very few where the ornamental tendrils, the fleurons, are not only ornamental but an integral part of the image. Both Lady Iolas are growing out of the ornaments, like the fruit and the roses out of her gardens or herself. On the left side, her care for Bastian lets her bloom just like a flower. When Bastian no longer needs her, because he has transformed her love and care into the wish for his own ability to love, she withers and dies like a tree, becoming the Lady Iola of the right side. But both are growing out of the ornaments, reminding us that as sad and tragic as their story is to us, by the way, there is no another story for another time for Lady Iola, they are after all fantasy. They are the fantasy Bastian needed in order to find his true will. But he had to forget both his father and his mother to find it. Our penultimate station is yours, Minrud, or mine. We can see Yor here, the blind miner. He looks a little like Michl Ende too, but that might be coincidental. He is blind, but only on the surface. In the darkness of his mind, he is able to see. Phantasien is built upon the dreams of the people from the human world, and Yor is mining for the dreams which have become precious images on wafer-thin and extremely fragile layers of glass or ice. Any vibration, even talking too loudly, might break them. Bastian must dig for a dream of his own, one that might bring him back to his world. Actually, Quadflieg's image is wrong, because Bastian has no light to guide him here, since he has already spent the light of Al-Zahir at the Cloister of Stars. Yor can see below. Bastian must work blindly. Not all of the images we can see in Quadflieg's Minrud are her original creations. This watch may be inspired by Salvatore Dali, the girl with the turtle probably by Ende's other novel Momo. And here, left to the symbols of Freemasonry, we can find a direct citation of Anselmus from E.T.A. Hoffmann's The Golden Pot. Ende would use a similar image in his last novel, The Wish Punch. Bastian has already lost every perception of time when he finally finds an image causing an immediate emotional reaction. It is the image of a man dressed like a dentist, frozen in a block of ice. And his longing for and his wish to love that man overwhelms Bastian so much he forgets his last memory, his own name. Armed with nothing but this fragile image, the boy without name seeks the waters of life, but he has not thought about the former Acharai, who are now sick of their new life, as always laughing Schlamuffen. They seek their savior's guidance, if need by force, and break the irreplaceable but fragile image of his dream. Fuchur and Atreu chase them away, but the broken image cannot be mended. The boy without name finally takes off Aurin, and is moments later, together with Atreu and Fuchur, transported inside. The waters of life are within reach now, but still the head of the black snake is blocking their way in. Without memory, Bastian is not allowed to enter. Atreu, however, having preserved everything Bastian had told him, stands up for him as his friend, obtaining passage for the three of them. Drinking from the waters of life, Bastian gladly lets go of every change he once had wished for. He is now exactly as he was before he entered Phantasien, but for the first time glad to be himself. He now also remembers whom he wished to share the waters of life with, his grieving father. But the snakes cannot grant him passage into his world until he has ended each and every story he has begun in Phantasien. Again, Atreu stands up for him. He will bring all stories to their end in his stead, as his friend, and Fuchur trusts they will succeed with luck. Roswitha Quadflieg's last image spoils the ending a little before its time, since on her second portrayal of Aurin's inside, both passages are already open. Still, I love the composition. The well reminds me of a famous poem by C.F. Meyer, and it is such a simple thing. But for the first and only time, we are seeing Atreyu only from behind, a very subtle hint we might be heading for a final goodbye. When Bastian steps into his world again, he finds himself back in the same school attic where he had started to read. The book is gone, and so are the waters of life. But now he starts to transform his experience in the real world. Completely on his own, he finds his way out of the closed and abandoned schoolhouse and goes right home. By sharing his experience with his father, he finally is able to mend and restore the emotional bond that had been damaged by his mother's death, and to, figuratively, share the waters of life with him. Determined to confess about his theft and loss of the Neverending Story, he visits the antiquarian Mr. Coriander again, and their strained relationship is transformed as well, by finding out that they are in fact both Phantasian travelers. Now I have to confess that I do not think Roswitha Quadflieg's drawing skills are on the same level as her designing skills. It is not the execution I find convincing, it is the whole concept as such. And even her formal weaknesses as an illustrator are completely consistent with the feeling of medieval book illumination and early book printing being married successfully with the fantastic content of the book. I love its formal unity and its high level of stylization. I knew from the get-go I wouldn't be getting any photorealistic or even any dramatically cineastical depiction of what I read, nor did I in fact expect to. The high level of stylization rather helped stimulating my own imagination to fill out the blanks. Michl Ende loved a high level of stylization. As a cineast, he loved Andrzej Wajda and Kurosawa more than Hollywood. Roswitha Quadflieg and Michl Ende have managed to make the experience of reading a magical book from medieval times part of their intended experience of the Neverending Story. I feel that a proper movie adaptation of the book should likewise include the experience of watching a movie, both in content and stylistically. I might probably have told the real-world parts in black and white like the Wizard of Oz does, and the Phantasian part in a stylized two-color system like Magna Color or early Technicolor, preferably in the colors green and red. It might have been a tough sell though.